So Jessica Sharp is the founder and CEO of Sharp Brain Consulting. She has a master's in public health from the University of Missouri and is currently a student at William James College, where Jessica is obtaining her doctorate and leadership psychology. Her education at William James College focuses on organizational development, psychology, and leadership. She regularly speaks at various topics related to brain and leadership. Jessica's work experience includes work in the nonprofit sector as well as diversity and inclusion. She's committed to improving her community. She does this through her involvement in a variety of organizations, including the Junior League of Greenville, the Greenville Theater, and fostering great ideas. She is a graduate of Leadership Greenville and is a diversity fellow with the Riley Institute and has been recognized for her work to better the Greenville community. A few of her accolades, I will mention a few, but highly does not define her or her worth or value. Recognized as a change maker by Multiplying Good, named 2018 the Young Professional of the Year, and 2018 by the Greenville Chamber of Commerce. She's named as 2017's Rising Star by the Association of the Junior League International. In 2015, she was the best and brightest under 35 those days. 35 and under. And she's given a TED Talk in Greenville, which if you haven't seen any of her TED Talks, please visit her website. Jessica is phenomenal, and we're truly honored to have her all the way from Greenville. Graced with your presence. So without further ado, Jessica Sharp.
Okay, perfect. You can click once for sure. So I'm really looking forward to being with you today. So I'm going to sort of sit. I'm going to be like over here, but I'm going to try to pay attention to this pillar here. So I'm going to sort of, I don't really stand still. There you go. So I'm really looking forward to spending the next little bit of time with you today, talking about self-care, a little bit about the brain, a little bit about stress, and essentially, you know, my goal is to help you all to better have tools to sort of live your best life. So Quinn already introduced me. I always just keep the slide in just because I feel like it, but that's more about me. We can sort of move on from that slide too. And the next slide, if I remember correctly, just it's going to take its time, and that's fine. So I wanted to start off today with sort of making sure that we are on the same page about a few different, essentially, sort of terms and things, and then we're going to focus on the brain. So if you sort of look at the slides, if you know either one of these two screens or virtually, there's some basically sort of phases, if you will, to stress and dealing with stress, and sort of this first one is just an awareness that either some days are more difficult than others, or the sort of the way I feel like I experience stress is that the things that I have to do feel like they are more than what I can do in the set amount of time that I have to do them. And so for me, that is often sort of when I'm like, I think I might be a little bit stressed. And then sort of over time, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, that when we experience stress on a frequent basis, that stress can become chronic. And we will talk very, very specifically about chronic stress and why we need to sort of pay attention to it. And then chronic stress, when that sort of continues to develop and and we aren't able to either cope with it at all or cope with it effectively, that can lead to burnout, which is the way I sometimes describe it is almost like hitting a wall. And it's like, I'm done, my battery's on red, I can't do anything for anybody, right? So I want to sort of hear from you all a little bit. How many of you all have experienced what you feel like is chronic stress that just lasts over a consistent period of time? Yep, I'm sort of like trying real hard to get out of that right now. And have any of you ever felt like you have hit or sort of experienced burnout? Yeah. Oh boy. And when you think about either that stress that you've experienced or burnout, what do you feel like has led to those feelings of just, there's too much to do and or some days are just more difficult than others? Yeah, go ahead.
For me, it was like that in my family responsibility that comes with it.
Mm-hmm. So a death in the family and then the corresponding responsibilities that are just very overwhelming and feel like, why can't this be easier? Yeah, go ahead.
For me, I tend to sometimes over-obligate myself.
Yeah. So when we over-obligate, we say yes, or we did too much. We're like, I want to do that thing, and then all of a sudden we're like, that's too many things. Yeah, okay.
Work overload.
Work overload. Yeah. And I would imagine that just like some of these other things, we can't really do anything about that. Right? Anybody else, or what causes just chronic stress, burnout, what's making things feel heavy? Ooh, yeah, motherhood. Yeah, I'm nobody's mama, but I have a lot of friends with babies and one very good one. And yeah, sometimes it's hard. Yeah, go ahead.
Technology and the inability to disconnect.
Technology and the inability to disconnect. We actually can talk a little bit about that. So my last sort of question for now, I love a question, is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the very most possible, 1 being the very least possible. What is your stress level right now? And you can either yell it out or just sort of like use your fingers to indicate where you are right now. So I've got a 3, a 2, a 4, some 3s, some 4, 5. Uh-oh.
You don't have that on the radar. I'm on the scale.
Right, we off the scale. 5 does not even begin to describe what we did. So we're gonna now, I wanna talk a little bit about the brain so that we understand what is actually happening to us when we're experiencing stress. I really started learning, and you can use the next slide. I really started learning about the brain a lot when I was teaching at Teach for America. And we sort of learn a little bit about the brain specifically of teenagers. And I moved back to Greenville. And I realized that, and I guess lots of people know this, but that teenagers are very similar, sort of regardless of socioeconomic factors, where they live, et cetera. And I thought, let me figure some stuff out about why they behave this way. And then I just kept learning more and more and more about the brain. And for me, I feel like when I have information about sort of what I'm experiencing, it helps to make it easier to find the tools that I need, right? So that's why I'm always telling you about the brains. So you can click it again. So the first slide that you're gonna see is an interesting part of the brain. It's called the amygdala. Have any of you heard of the amygdala before? Generally a good bit of people have whenever I talk about it, but your amygdala is sort of dug deep back in your brain. It develops very early, sort of in life and development. And it is small, but it does a lot of things. So the amygdala is where fear lives in our brain and our fear response. So our amygdala sort of generally scanning the environment, sort of looking around, taking things in, and sort of identifying, is this situation safe? Is this situation not safe, right? And as long as we're safe, our body and brain just sort of continue moving along. But the millisecond that our amygdala says, I don't actually think I'm safe right now, it sets off a reaction in the body that most people have heard of called the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so our amygdala, which I will also say is not our most sophisticated part of the brain, and we'll talk about that part in 2 slides, but our amygdala will decide within milliseconds if we're not safe and then react. And that safety is certainly physical safety, but also psychological, emotional safety, because we are social beings. We don't really get to do anything fully all by ourselves. We are programmed to be in relationship and in community. And so when our brain says, uh-oh, there's something that we are scared of, we either fight the situation, which can look like, physically fighting certainly. It can look like yelling, it can look like sort of diving into something. Sometimes this can also look like diving into work, right? To just say, I'm going to deal with whatever this thing is. The next sort of possible option is that we may freeze, where we literally sort of stop and it almost looks like, deer in the headlights. Or if we are just truly so overwhelmed, our nervous system is like, can't take it, and we may pass out. And then the last response is to flee, where we are getting the heck out of the situation, right? We either want to physically leave a situation, right? Or not engage. I have worked with students and teachers for my entire career. And sometimes you'll have students who they'll sort of be intentional about like maybe what hallways they go down, or they'll be late to a class, right? Or they may sort of be late to school on purpose to miss a class, right? And sometimes that is because whatever is happening in that situation is too much, and they got to sort of get out. Sometimes folks ask me if there's a 4th response called a fawn response, which is essentially very people pleasing. And from the neuroscience, what I sort of interpret based on what I read is that that's basically a type of a response. That's more than likely probably a flight response or a fight response. But sort of chemically, we're going to do one of their things. The other few things to note about the amygdala is that it is where our core emotions live. Have any of you seen the movie Inside Out? It's a Pixar movie. If you haven't, it's real cute. It's on Disney Plus. But it's about this little girl and her life, and she goes through some big changes. And then it sort of goes back and forth between what's happening and what's in her brain. And she's controlled by 5 emotions. And they are anger, they're put on this picture, anger, fear, joy, disgust, and sadness. Those 5 plus surprise are our core emotions. They are the emotions that we come to the world with. All other emotions and sort of emotional responses need to be articulated for us, right? So even though we experience other things, and Toronto Burke talks about this in her book, even though we experience other things, we don't have the language for them until we're given language, right? And then the other thing is that the amygdala, partly because of its role with fear, has a big role to play in stress, right? And so the things to remember about the amygdala also, just sort of quickly before I move on, it moves very fast and it is very powerful, but it is not sort of where our best thinking. So that's your amygdala. And then we go to the next one. The next part of the brain that I'll talk about a little bit more quickly is the hippocampus. This is very proximate to the amygdala, and it plays a big role in learning and memory. It helps to sort of consolidate and make sense of memories. It helps to store memories, particularly short-term to long-term. There are several scenes in Inside Out where Riley's memories are like sort of sent through this tube into different places, right? That's sort of quite accurate. It's sort of a good way to explain what is actually happening. Your amygdala is also responsible for memory retrieval. So if I'm trying to remember something, particularly something that's maybe a long-term memory, my hippocampus sort of helps me sort through and picks up the memory for me to remember. And in a second, I'll tell you what happens with stress to all of these parts of the brain, but I like to explain first. And then the last part of the brain that I'll talk about is the prefrontal cortex. I don't know, sometimes my sort of favorite part of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex is right behind your forehead. Most folks have also generally heard about this part of the brain too. It is responsible for what we call executive functioning skills. And I'm going to sort of read them quickly on this list, but impulse control, emotional control, flexible thinking, which is like adjusting behavior, working memory, so being able to keep a little bit of information in your brain, self-monitoring, self-awareness, planning and prioritizing sort of into the future, task initiation, so this idea of like, I want to do this thing and then I do it, and then organization. So these are sort of our primary executive functioning skills. So what's interesting about the prefrontal cortex is that it does not finish developing until, depending on sort of what scientists you read, your early to mid to late teens. And so if you want to know why teenagers behave the way that they do, this is part of it. You also sort of have hormones happening, but the part of the brain that separates us from every other sort of animal on the planet, the parts of our brain that help us to really think and plan and decide what we want to do, control ourselves, that then finish developing until our early to mid to late 20s. So I'm going to sort of now put those things together and tell you what's happening when we're experiencing particularly sort of stress that lasts over a long period. So when our amygdala says, hey folks, something is happening here and we are anxious and stressed and fearful, and we have to act. What happens at that point is, I sort of sometimes describe like your amygdala is almost like a guard outside of the castle. And then your amygdala says, we are taking over and every other part of the brain needs to follow what we're going to say to do. And your prefrontal cortex, I sometimes describe it as like the queen of your castle. And so it's almost like the queen of the castle has gone into sort of like an escape room, sort of a locked room. She doesn't even know what's going on all the time, right? It's certainly not in control. And so your amygdala is just walking around making sure that we're safe, right? Your hippocampus is impacted in terms of memory and learning because like they're physically proximate. So when your amygdala starts taking up space, your hippocampus is like, oh no, I'm running out of space. And they also, the two of them together, your amygdala and hippocampus, they attach emotion to memories that are significant, that are traumatic, right? But these sort of important milestones. That's why we have emotions attached to it. But what happens is your amygdala takes over, and then your prefrontal cortex is just, it's not at its best, right? Sometimes it's not even sort of able to do anything. And remember, our prefrontal cortex is where we do our best thinking. So when we are chronically stressed, it is quite difficult for us to do our best thinking. The other things that happen are on this slide, and the list is long, but it's because a lot of things are impacted. When we are chronically stressed, that stress that is consistent, sort of lasts over a period of time, it impairs our attention and concentration, right? And that's because our prefrontal cortex is not as strong. And that's where we do, we sort of pay attention and concentrate. It can absolutely reduce our cognition, same sort of thing, our creativity and our memory, right? Thinking about the hippocampus. It can diminish our social skills and our social judgment, right? When we're stressed, we probably are not making the best social decisions. And again, that's because all that our amygdala cares about is safety, and that's it, right? And it doesn't matter if people feel good or whatever, because our amygdala is focused on safety. They can reduce motivation, determination, and effort. And part of that is because we're tired, right? Because our brain is working a little bit harder. When we're stressed like this, our cortisol increases, which unfortunately not only makes us gain weight, but it's sort of our body can't handle when our cortisol is too high for too long, right? And so it just makes everything a little bit harder, right? You're more likely to be more tired, you're more likely to want to sleep more, right? You're more likely to be cranky, whatever sort of you at stress is, it's probably not your best, right? It increases the likelihood of depression and anxiety, as well as chronic stress can lead to stress-related illnesses, disease, can lead to cardiovascular issues because your body is working harder than it's supposed to, and early death. So stress is like not something that we need to live with. So I want to pause before we move on and ask you sort of, one, do you have any questions about this? But when you sort of listen to the impact of stress on our body, what do you feel? Stress or stress? What else do you feel or think? Anxiety. Okay. What questions do you feel like you have? So how do we get out? Right. And then what was your question?
I was just gonna say, I question myself, like, what did I do wrong? What am I,
So how many of you have a similar the question, because I know we got folks on Zoom who may not be able to hear, but feeling like, what did I do to create the situation? How many of you, I'm actually changing it, that feel sort of similar to that? Ooh, I need more time. Right, reflection. And I want to ask you another question, and you, even if you don't sort of answer it vocally, I at minimum really want you to think about it. And the question I have is, and I have a feeling what some of you all will say, but I still want to ask it. What sort of causes the feeling that you are stressed, and particularly if you're chronically stressed or have been, what sort of pushes you to quickly sort of take responsibility for that and sort of own the stress, even though earlier we said that sometimes it's stuff you can't control. So why do we sort of feel compelled to take this on and say, I'm gonna own this?
Because we must control everything.
Because we must control everything all the time.
Or you see how other people react. You're like, well, I'm not reacting.
Ooh, I repeat that. We see how other people are reacting, and then we think, well, wait a minute, if they can handle it, why can't I? Right? We're comparing.
Or that they put it on you, so it must be if someone else sees something, they've placed that stress more on you as well, as you've stressed out yourself. And I use myself as an example. In my marriage, I'm divorced, but you share things with people, you're already stressed about it, but then once they hear, then they put more stress on you because, well, you must have done something wrong, or you enabled, or whatever. So that's stress on top of stress.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Brene Brown quote 2 or 3 times, I think, maybe only 2 or 3. She's a social worker. She is a Netflix special and an HBO special. She's written a bunch of books. She's amazing. She called that an empathy miss. When we share something and what we really are like internally craving is empathy, like sort of somebody feeling with us and connecting to us, but what we get back instead is not empathy, right? Which sort of can make us feel even worse, which she talks about a lot in her most recent book. And I want to just go one more slide real quick before I sort of shift gears a second. And I want to just talk about burnout for a second. And this came from Verywell, which is they have just a lot of articles about health. It's a good website. But burnout is just exhaustion, right? Physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. It is just like, I can't take any more in sort of one or multiple of these categories. Specifically, occupational burnout, so burnout at work, is the loss of meaning in one's work, coupled with the exhaustion, right, as a result of long-term unresolved stress. So sometimes when we already are feeling burnout, whether it's related to work or not, it can absolutely bleed into work, and we're sort of like, I just don't really care about what I'm doing here. I'm just gonna I'm here because I have to be, and I don't have any emotional attachment to it. Right? So what I want you all to do is, if you've got like a piece of paper, that works. If you have, if you can remember sort of small bits of information, that's fine. I have ADHD, I can't remember much anything. Or you can type it on your phone, but I'm asking a question. And I want you to think about the answer, and then I want to sort of hear the answer. So, and you can click to ahead. How do you feel? I love talking about feelings. How do you feel about self-care? There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, because it's about what you think and feel. So I want to give you a second to either write an answer down, think of something, but I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 seconds to answer the question, how do you feel about self-care? So I'd love to hear from a few folks who are sort of comfortable sharing their thoughts. But how do we feel about self-care? And again, no right answer, no wrong answer. Yes, ma'am.
So until last year, I had never instituted self-care. It is absolutely essential now to my survival that I do it. And we have people in the chat too.
So I'm gonna jump here and then we'll go to the chat.
My response was similar to Glenn. I said, I feel self-care is necessary, and I was not aware of the importance of it until I turned 40. I'll be 45 this year, and like for the past 4 or 5 years, I've taken time out, like every 90 days to do something for myself.
Yeah.
Detached from, being a mom, working, and just say, this is what, Rakita wants, and I'm doing this for me. And I don't regret it regardless of what it is.
Right. Does anybody have, and if there's anything in the
My
chat.
friends online say I have a hard time prioritizing it. It's needed, and everyone has different methods to complete it, like baths, working out, etc. I don't do it enough. Self-care is important and essential to being in good mental and physical health. I need more of it. I think it's important. I must take care of myself to be a blessing to others.
Ooh. Does anybody else have any thoughts about how we feel about self-care? Guilty. Oh, okay, I'm gonna go here and then go here. Guilty. I was sort of waiting for that answer because I sort of assumed something would go that way. Why does it feel guilty to take care of yourself?
Because you always feel like you're leaving something.
Because we feel like we're leaving something undone. Okay. And then over here.
I was just gonna say, regarding self-care, it's something that you want to do, but unfortunately, it's one of those things that seems to get pushed to the side because of all the other things that have to get done. So even though it really should be in the we have to do this category, a lot of times it is more in the I want to, and therefore it doesn't get done.
Jessica, this one is powerful too. It says self-care is so important, but a lot of times we overly focus on physical self-care and not mental self-care.
Ooh.
I couldn't survive without it.
Ooh. And we're gonna talk about sort of the different dimensions of self-care, but I'm now gonna sort of flip, and there won't be a slide that matches this because it's just sort of in my head. I'm gonna ask you another one, 5 question, Quinn knows this question. It's gonna be another sort of same range of questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the very, very, very most possible, 1 being the very, very least possible. How much do you love yourself? So do you want me to repeat the question? 5 is the very most possible, 1 is the very least possible. And how much do you love yourself? 1 to 5. 3, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, 3. Okay, now I have a whole separate follow-up question. So we have actually a lot of 5s. What does that mean to you? what does it mean to love yourself? Yes, ma'am.
That I prioritize myself so that I'm whole and well to take care of my husband, or baby and mom and those around me.
Mhm. So that I'm prioritizing myself and showing up for you so that you can show up for other people.
That I come first, that everything else, I can't love anyone else until I love myself. So whatever it is, the ideals or whatever there is about Monica, I love that part of her as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So sort of loving ourselves first before we love other people. So here's the thing, now my brain's a little confused. Because I'm hearing lots of 5s and 4s and 3s, which is great. The lowest I've heard is a 0, which like just I couldn't even handle. But I'm hearing lots of 3s, 4s, 5s. But then I'm also hearing things like, well, like self-care is important, but I don't spend enough time on it. I feel guilty. Self-care is selfish. That's not anything y'all said. I just sort of hear it in the world. And so to me, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I don't know if there's a match. Yeah.
I get that because I do a lot for other people, and I'm thinking, well, they don't have that what I have inside of me. I can recruit, they can't. You know, I'm feeling like I know how to do it for myself. They don't, so I need to help. I need to reach out. I need to be there for them because I know how to do it. But then I don't really find the time to do it. I know how, but do I do it? But for everyone else, I do. I love myself, but I'm gonna show you how to love you more because I feel like I already have it.
So what I'm hearing you say is because you know that you love yourself, you can give out to other people because you know you have it and you know how to sort of build it back up. But because you end up giving so much, you're like, oh shoot, I don't actually have the time to do the thing that I know how to do, but I just can't find the time to do it.
And then you end up breaking your own resilience because you're pouring out so much, and oftentimes no one's pouring back into you. So this series and what we're trying to do is really for us to stand in and ground into how are we pouring into ourselves, because we can't if we're not.
And I sometimes sort of feel like, well, I feel this way a lot. I feel like there's a sort of story about women. There's a story that the world believes about women and sort of how we're supposed to show up in the world, how we're supposed to be, right? There's a sort of separate and sometimes aligned and sometimes very disaligned stories, specifically around Black women and sort of how we are supposed to show up in the world, what we are supposed to do, what we are supposed to not do, right? There's a whole separate, sometimes similar story about mamas and what mamas are supposed to do and not do, right? And I sort of feel like that there are women in the world that show up that we're like, okay, I got it, I'm gonna make it happen, I'm gonna do what needs to be done, et cetera, et cetera. And the story that I make up to what I believe is that sometimes the world forgets that we are human too, and that we need some love too. And that's why sometimes people don't sort of say, oh, you good? Because they're like, well, she's all right, she's got it. And then we get to the point where helping, and then sort of don't be.
I came up with a mom, she said, I didn't want to bother you. You're a superwoman, you have so much going on. And I said, real talk? I would like a hug too sometimes. So what I give out to y'all in service to you, I also like to receive a check-in too.
So I'm going to tell you 2 stories, and then I'm going to sort of tell you again why I think self-care is important, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So I am, Quinn mentioned this, but I'm finishing up probably last degree program, and in a doctoral program, you do a lot of research, right? I'm getting a degree in psychology, but anyway, I'm doing some research. And the universe sort of told me that I need to do research about belonging and love, and I was like, okay. And so my research is about workplace belonging, right? How do we make sure that every human in a workplace feels like they belong for all of the benefits of that? But I also have been doing research on love because in 1943, Abraham Maslow introduced us to a hierarchy of needs that I won't go into for now. But when he introduced that, he described love and belonging as the same, right? That love, right? This idea of love, and there's lots of different definitions, and the need to belong are very sort of together. And so I've been doing research on love. I was, doing all this research, et cetera, and to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought a lot about self-love before this. I'm on the, I'm 32, right? So I'm younger in terms of, in my experience, women who do this like deep personal development, I find that like, unfortunately we do it too late because again, all those stories from the world. And so I started doing all this research, and one of the first thoughts I had was, I don't want to believe what I am reading about love. It is more convenient for me not to believe that what I'm hearing or what I was reading. I was reading two things. One, the world is a mess, we know that. But the only way to actually fix the world is if we love ourselves and others better. Oh, I didn't want to believe that. And then two, the other thing is I just kept reading and it became clear as day to me that our capacity and ability to love others is predicated on our ability to love ourselves. And there's a slide in here later, I'll show it to you later, that is a RuPaul quote. And it's how you gonna love anybody else if you don't love yourself? I'm misquoting it, you'll see it later. But I didn't want to believe it because it was much easier for me to love other people and do that really, really well than to sort of stop everything and love myself and sort of prioritize that. But y'all, I was reading stuff from people who were much smarter than me, and I was like, shoot, I think that this might be it. And then I started loving myself more, and I was like, oh, they were so right. It's so much easier for me to love everybody else, right? And so that for me was like, I sort of feel like I want everybody to feel the same sort of like deep commitment to like, we have to love ourselves. Like you really can't give to everybody else if you don't start with yourself, right? I fly a lot. I sort of live in 2 cities, and every single time on that airplane, without fail, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on before you put it on for somebody else. Even the babies, they tell you to put it on yourself first, and then every time, don't matter, they would say it. And then the second sort of story that I want to share with you, and it's really about what sort of this journey of what it's going to look like for each of us individually to like love ourselves and to care for ourselves. I don't have children. That is not my ministry. That is not sort of why I'm on this planet at this time. I love a lot of other people's babies, but it is not for me to have my own. But my boyfriend has a daughter, and I decided we sort of we're in this sort of thing for life. So I was like, all right, let's bring her in. And I sort of, when I met her, I was like, oh, this is sort of what they say when you like love these people that you don't even know yet. But I started asking myself and talking to him about how I wanted to love her and like what it meant for me to love her well. And for me, I was like, well, I feel like the way I'm going to love her is to help her get to know herself more, to help her have really fun experiences, to help her understand what she loves in the world, what she loves about herself, what she doesn't love in the world, what she loves about herself, but maybe can sort of change and evolve if she feels like it, right? But I was like, my job is to help her love herself. Like that's really all I'm sort of here to do. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, the way that I love her is the same way that I need to love myself. Right, I sort of can't give her something and model for her what this means if I don't do it for me, right? And I know that it's sort of sometimes difficult to say I'm going to put all of these other things down because I have to pick up me. But if you don't, you will burn out. It's science, it's biology. Your brain can literally only take so much. Your body can only take so much. And I promise you, your brain, if it's not at its best, nothing else will do, period. And if you're stressed, you're probably not going to want to eat well, or really need to be eating even better because your brain's sort of, your body's all off, but you're probably not going to eat well, probably want to sleep more. You definitely, if you do it for a long time, you're going to gain weight because cortisol just does it, right? So I feel like all of us just sort of want to be at our best, right? But in order to do that, we need to take care of ourselves. So I am going to ask you more questions, but I'm not going to want you to tell me the answer unless you really want to, and then I promise I will finish these slides. I'm good, y'all just go completely off script. Okay, so the other question I want to ask you, you can share your answer, you don't have to, this is for you. Because I want you to, if you feel comfortable, either close your eyes or sort of look down at the ground, but essentially don't have, if you look at me, I'm distracted, I move around a lot, so don't look at something else. And I want you to envision, right? Try as much as you can to like have a mental picture, if you can do it, of your best self. I want you to think about what she looks like, what she does in her free time, what she does day to day, where does she live, who does she spend time with, right? What does she dress like? I need you to have that picture in your head. Does everybody have a picture? And you can open your eyes and you can sort of, keep that picture. But part of what self-care allows us to do is not only to love ourselves, but it also allows us to get to wherever this person is, right? Whatever your best self is. You know, it's funny, Oprah been talking about live our best lives for a long time, and people start singing about it, and so now we're talking about it. Oprah been talking about it. And I sort of feel like oftentimes like that, like this is where we're going, right? We just need to figure out, how do I be better? How do I be my most joyful and happy selves? And so here's gonna help us do that. Okay, I'm back to my slides. We can click one more. Back on the slide. So what is self-care? I'm gonna quote from this book that I love. I got it from Barnes and Noble, and I'm now can't even stop quoting it enough. It's called the Self-Love Workbook. It's by Shana Ali, PhD. There's other sort of workbooks like this. This is just the one I happen to pick up and the one that I like a lot. So I'm gonna read what's on this slide in a second, but I'm first gonna read her definition of self-love. And self-love is the active practice of accepting, caring for, and encouraging oneself. And so that's not the only definition of self-love or love. There's really a lot of definitions of love. But in this definition, right, self-love requires caring for ourselves. And if you think about it, the people that we love in our lives, we care for them, we do things for them, right? So caring for ourselves sort of has to be a part of a self-love definition. And self-love, or self-care, is the holistic process that we all need in our life, that we all need in order to foster presence, engagement, wellness, and self-love. How many of you would like to be more present in your life? This telephone, we also know. How many of you want to have more wellness in your life, just to feel well, whatever that means for you? And then how many of you want to love yourself more deeply? I'm at a 5, y'all, and I'm always gonna be like more and more and more. That's always wrong, right? So self-care lets us do that. Self-care is subjective, and I think somebody in the chat mentioned this. It is going to vary from person to person. And y'all, millennials, my age group, sometimes we do really great things, sometimes we do things that are sort of annoying, but everybody does. We have sort of accidentally, I think, made self-care feel like all it is bubble baths and wine and, you know, I don't know, naps. I don't know. Self-care can be all of those things, but it doesn't have to be. I don't really like a bubble bath. It doesn't bring joy for me, right? I can drink wine, but I'd rather do other things, right? And so whatever you need to do for yourself, and we'll talk about how to identify that. It is not a one size fits all. And sort of furthermore, it includes various dimensions, which somebody in the chat said, certainly physical, right? We want to make sure that our physical bodies are well for us, right? And that just will look different for every person, but also creative, spiritual, social, and personal, right? All of sort of the dimensions of our life. We are not exclusively physical beings, so we can't exclusively focus on our sort of physical body. We have to be thinking about sort of how we care for ourselves more broadly. And actually, I'm going to ask this I'm going to pause before I switch slides. Those of you that have said you sort of engage very intentionally in self-care activities, like I know I heard every 90 days, what are some of the things that you are doing to care for yourself? Yeah.
On the spa and just like picking up a book that, you know, talks about, you know, like either religion or self-care or, you know, personal development and growth. I make sure that I try to read at least one of those types of books within that 90-day period.
Mm-hmm. So going to the spa and then reading a book that's either sort of spiritual based, religion based, or just personal sort of self-growth. Mm-hmm. And did you?
Yeah, I'll say on a daily, I'm very much an introvert and my husband is very much an extrovert. So when I come home, he allows me that space to decompress. Don't ask about work, don't talk about the cat right now. I mean, I need to go upstairs. Like upstairs is my little area, my own TV room where I can go decompress, sit down, relax, change my clothes, and then come down and start cooking or doing whatever. But I'm a better person for the household.
Probably kinder, yeah.
And I can just kind of decompress from my stressful day at work.
Yeah, so sort of coming home and giving your brain a minute, giving your brain some time before you have to engage again. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other things that folks write?
I think for me, because maybe for me, social media, you know, the self-care it's like you have it in a box at this point because everybody's doing it, everybody's talking about it. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I just say, I'm not going to clean up today. I'm just going to go downstairs, I'm going to sit down on the couch, and that is going to be my day with my dog.
Yeah.
And that really helps me because I know in a day and a half from Saturday, another day or whatever, I'm getting ready for the next 5-day, week. So just going downstairs, sitting down and just understanding this is my livable space. I'm okay if it's not clean and understanding that.
Is your house?
Yes.
Right.
So a lot of times that's just self-care to just decompress, like she was saying, and not worry about anything else and just kind of let the day float away. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
This may sound a little weird, but with Facebook, I limit the number of friends that I have because I want to be able to, I like to be able to like one-on-one deeply engage with people. And I don't want to miss your child's birthday or, a death in the family. So I limit, I could have maybe like 150, 200 people instead of, 500 or 1,000.
It's like you're using Facebook as your community. Like that's really the way that you keep track of your communities. Yeah, I can talk probably forever about social media. And there are a lot of benefits to technology and social media. I have equally probably as many concerns, but I do feel like one, sometimes it can be overwhelming because we're sort of available nonstop. And two, it is easy to feel like self-care is this, like it can only look this way, right? And it can only be pretty, right? Or face masks, we are okay with those. But there's not sort of we don't necessarily have this picture of self-care, including sitting down on the couch, not cleaning up and spending time with your dog, right? Or, because we can, these other things we have, right? There are pictures and things of books and the spa and all of that, but there's some things that I feel like are completely missed when we think about what is self-care actually.
Yeah, I've just learned that multitasking is really bad for the brain.
It's not real, yeah. It's not real for neurotypical brains.
Yeah, and so one thing I'm trying to do is not multitask, which I do all the time because it also, I could be here like thinking about what I'm doing next.
Yep.
But one thing I also learned is anytime your phone is even near you, you're essentially multitasking. And so I'm trying to, when I'm home, put it away.
Do you feel, how do you feel when you do not have your phone?
I'm actually looking up.
Yeah. So I love what you said about multitasking. So neurotypical brains, so that means like brains that sort of come here, but in the way they report programs, right? Folks who are neurodivergent or folks ADHD, folks who are autistic, there's sort of a group of us who fit over here. But for neurotypical brains, which is most people, multitasking actually isn't real. What you're doing is task switching. So you think that you're paying attention to your, and this is sort of, I should also say, we cannot do two cognitively stimulating tasks. If you have made the same macaroni and cheese for 500 years, you can do lots of things and not pay attention to that. If you drive to work the same way every single day, you probably don't actually have to pay attention to that. But if you're trying to do a work project and have a conversation, that requires cognitive activity. It is not real. You're literally going back and forth between activities, and you're exhausted, right? Probably at the end of the day, because your brain is having to sort of jump back and forth instead of being able to stay in one sort of place. Folks sometimes talk about this like flow state where you just like feel so in sync with what you're doing, and it's like you can just feel very sort of productive and creative. It's really difficult for that to happen when your brain is sort of going back and forth. But the world has sort of made us feel like we have to multitask, right? But it's not real. You want back and forth, and it's not. Yeah.
Something I was gonna add too is, I was definitely at that 5 level with feeling burnout and stressed out. So for me, I feel like you feel that you're out of control, that your life, there are all these things you have to do or you can't set boundaries for whatever reasons. And I started a challenge. So when you feel like you're out of control of your life, if you start some type of challenge or something where you make yourself a priority, like mine is water, no alcohol, eating good, going to the gym, 10 pages of motivational reading. It's a 75-day hard challenge. But just feeling like you have control over your life again and that you are making yourself a priority. Because I know a lot of times when you get burnout and you get really stressed out, you feel like you're having to do a lot and maybe you don't have control over your life anymore. So some sense of control over what's going on, I think a lot of times will help reground you.
I love all of that. I mean, I love that you said that, and I love all the things you said. That when we're burnt out, it oftentimes does feel like things are out of our control. We are not in control of our time, or our tasks, or our life. And I sort of feel like my default tendency is when I'm in that mode of like, it's too much, that is when self-care feels the most selfish. But that is when we need it the most. But it's like, oh, there's too many things and I gotta figure this out. And I also love what you said about making self-care, making it just a part of what you do. And actually, I think if you go to the next slide, Quinn, there is, okay, so you can stop that. I'm gonna stay there and then I'm gonna go to the next one real quick. I'm just gonna leave this question for you. I'm not gonna so I'm gonna tell you it and you can sit with it later. But our brain likes routines. Our brains like doing the same things over and over and over and over again, right? Changing behaviors is, you can do it, right? It happens, but sometimes it's difficult because our brains like to do the same things. So if you can begin to make self-care a ritual, which we'll talk about in 3 slides, it is just easier because you don't have to think about it anymore, right? It's just something that you do all the time. So I want you to take this question, ruminate on it later. If you are a journaler, journal on it later. But what would you need to do or stop doing to live the life of your dreams, to get to that person that you visualized earlier? And y'all, you are going to probably, to get there, you don't have this point. You just have to. And Glennon Doyle in her book Untamed talked about, it's sort of a bunch of sort of short stories. And she talks about a conversation she had with one of her daughters, her youngest one. And she said that I think she wanted to do something, and they were sort of having a conversation. And she said, well, Mom, if I do this thing, I will disappoint you. And Glennon said, well, will you disappoint you if you do this thing? And she said, well, no, of course not. And she said, I would rather you always disappoint me as long as you don't disappoint yourself, right? Some of this may look like you may have to say no to some things, right? And some of them may look like we might have to roll off with some stuff. Y'all, I rolled off 2 boards recently, and it was hard as hell to send those emails, but I was like, I cannot continue to prioritize everybody else over me. I can't do it. There's only 24 hours in a day, right? And I've got to have time for rest. You are probably going to disappoint people, and that's okay. Go to the next slide. And then you can sort of take a picture of this, but here are some ideas for self-care, because when I started really thinking about, like, okay, what do I want to do to feel good? There's lots of questions you can ask yourself, right? You can ask yourself things like, what fills up your cup? What makes you feel energized? What makes you feel calm? What makes you feel at peace? What makes you feel happy? What makes you feel rested, right? So you can start to sort of think about what are the things that I just like to do. But you can also, there are a bunch of lists, and I sort of pulled from lots of lists. But, on this one side where it starts with engaging in physical activity, these are things that are like particularly good for your brain. And I'll sort of go through them quickly. Engaging in some physical activity. Sort of the thing I will say about this is, for some of us, engaging in physical activity, just doing it, like we don't need any sort of motivation or drive, or like I'm gonna do it, whatever. Or for some of us, we're like, I'm gonna engage in physical activity, lose weight, and that sort of works for us. I don't like working out. I don't like it at all. And when I tie physical activity to my health, you would think that it would make me want to do more, but it just makes me want to do less. So I have started finding things that I just like to do that are just sort of physical activity. And I won't sort of go into all of the science, but it does lots of good things to your brain, right? It sort of increases things like your dopamine, which is your reward hormone in your brain, and can decrease things like cortisol. So some sort of physical activity. Taking some deep breaths. This can be just, I'm gonna sit and take a few deep breaths, right? We often talk about a 4x4x4, where you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold that breath for 4 seconds, and you release for 4 seconds. Means we're taking a beat and do it again. You can do sort of a full-on meditation. There are about 1,025,000 apps and YouTube videos. But if you are new to meditation, just like a pro tip, please do not start with trying to do 25, 30-minute meditations. Nobody does it except for like shamans and, just do 5 minutes or less, right? And then if you get an app in particular, it can remind you. And then you can say, oh, all right, I gotta do my breathing, right? The Apple Watches remind you to breathe, but I know for me, I just ignore it. So try to take time to deep breathing. I'm practicing gratitude. And that this can be expressing it, right? Saying to somebody, I'm grateful for, I appreciate. It can be writing it down. It can be just thinking about it, right? And it can be things that you're grateful for about you or other people, right? But gratitude just feels good. Repeat affirmations. I didn't want to believe that affirmations were real for a while. Like everybody was talking about it, but I don't know that. Yeah, but it works. The way that we talk to ourselves, and I'm talking about this for a whole separate hour, the way that we talk to ourselves is really important. And we all have an internal narrative. Some of ours are kind. Some of ours, probably a bunch of women, they are not kind. And we talk to ourselves in ways that we would literally never talk to anybody else. If you want to do self-care work, actually, it's probably the first thing you should do is start to pay attention to how you talk to yourself and then change it. I had a life coach in 2015, 7 years ago, I guess, changed my whole life. And we started working on self-care. Talk with internal narratives, like my self-talk. And it changed how I moved in the world. It changed what I believed. It changed everything about sort of my life. And repeating affirmations is sort of that same thing. It's like you say something enough, your brain just sort of starts to do that. Laughing is good for your body. Find something you like and laugh. Taking breaks, right? So taking intentional breaks. And please don't feel bad about the break, because if you feel bad about it, you sort of just take a break and don't feel bad. Put a timer on, take a break. Naming your feelings. This is like really, I'm gonna go through this list real fast because it is what people said, and I like get people out when we said it. But naming your feelings, from a brain perspective, it activates part of your prefrontal cortex, and just trust me, it's good for you. Sort of articulating and naming your feelings, and I will also say, either writing them down or sort of saying them to yourself, or with somebody who is empathetic in response, right? Because an empathy miss can happen, and then we feel even worse. But sort of articulating how we feel helps our brain make sense of it, and sort of can help our brain wrap itself around it and calm us. Listening to your favorite song, favorite album, favorite playlist, right? That also does sort of good things for your brain. Dancing too, same thing, right? Physical activity for dancing, but increases your dopamine. For some people, reading is the opposite of self-care. For people like me, it's like, I want to read all the things all the time. Taking a bath, if that works for you, it still is on the list. It's not on the list. Stretching sometimes can feel really good for your physical body. Using like a fidget toy or something, particularly those of us who have ADHD, we love that sort of thing. Drawing or sort of coloring. There's 2,500 coloring books at every store I feel like you go to. Journaling, I have just like sort of fallen back in love with journaling over the past 9 months. And you can journal about anything. You can find a prompt. You can just write. You can write letters to yourself. You can sort of do whatever you want. Getting a massage, volunteering. Although sometimes it can feel like it's not so clear, but it oftentimes can. Crafting and sort of finding a craft that you like, that can really help from a creative perspective. But there's lots of different things that we can do. But as you were thinking about how do I engage in more self-care, one, sort of to our friend in the chat here, try to think beyond physical, but also think about what are the things that I find joy in and that make me feel good, or that I want to try and have never tried. Right? We sometimes talk about the connection to your inner child. Like, what did you love to do when you were little? Find somewhere to do that. I think one more slide, and you can hit click one more time. Sort of I got maybe one slide after this, but the thing I was talking about earlier about making self-care part of your routine, because then it just makes it like your brain just does it, is finding sort of things that you will do all the time. Right? What are the things that you will do every day? Right? And that can be, I'm going to come home from work and I'm going to sit for, I'm going to sort of have my after work routine and ritual before I do anything else, right? It could be, self-care also can look like sleep. I won't go into it, but sleep is really, really important. So you may say every day I'm going to sleep X amount of hours. And that's part of what I do for myself. But find something every day that just is a cap. It can be real small, What sort of things can you do a few times a week? What are things you can do monthly, right? Maybe every 3 months. And what are the things that you say every single year, I will do this, right? At the end of every single year, I have this sort of process where I go through and remind myself of my values and what they mean. And I sort of reflect on the past year and look forward to next year. Every year, right? So sort of begin to have these things that you do. And at the beginning, put them on your calendar like you would anything else for anybody else. Because if you would do it for somebody else, you should be able to do it for yourself. And then one more slide. Say all these things. You can click that one more time. This is just the thing I talked about. It's real cute. If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you gonna love somebody else? We all said that. And then action next time. So the last thing that I will say in the last probably 30 seconds is this is another Brené Brown. And this is from essentially it's from her book Gifts of Imperfection, which she rewrote 2 years ago, and the expanded version is much But she said it takes courage to say yes to rest and play, and I will also include self-care, in a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. There will be times where self-care still feels hard, and it still feels like I should be doing something else because of the multitude of reasons why. It requires courage to say, I will choose me over everybody else, right? But the thing that I know for sure is you won't be stuck with you forever. You probably got, you got kids, you're gonna be stuck with this for a minute too. I still call my mom, all sorts of stuff. But everybody else in the world may possibly come and go, but you won't be stuck with you forever. So if we're gonna be courageous and sort of choose to spend our time doing something, we might as well choose it being ourselves, because you gotta stick with you. And if you hit burnout, or if you have chronic stress or whatever, you're gonna have to get yourself out of it. And listen, I love regular jobs, I love work and all that, I've been working forever. Like, you gotta prioritize you over work, because if you burn out, you're not good for you or anybody else. So the thing I will leave you with is, when it's hard, remind yourself that it's okay that it's hard, because it's just sort of the way it is, but decide that you want to be courageous for you if you ever want to do anything for other people. So I'm pretty sure it's one-on-one. I'm happy to stay for a few minutes if folks have questions, but I'm also happy to plan to kind of wrap this thing up so that people can get back to work or whatever it is that they are doing after today. So I'll be here, I'll stay here for a few minutes, but that's all I got.
Our friends online, our friends in here, and to Jessica, many thanks. We're so very delighted to have all of you. And guess what, y'all? We just getting started. This is on my second one. We got 3 more to go. So I hope I will see your lovely faces, either online or in person. There is more in store for us, for Mindset Matters. You matter to all of us. That's why we're doing this. Please provide your feedback. You will get a survey. We taped it. It will go out the same way it went out first time. We hope that you'll bring a friend next time as well as we wrap up each series. There's more information if you're not a member of WIC. See why you should join. It's evident right here. We have many people who are part of WIC, and they invite you to be a part of our family too. So again, thank you so much, Jessica, for coming from Greenville and blessing us with all these gems today. And all of our friends online, we look forward to seeing you in person next time. So please take some information. We'll stick around. Thank you again.